Well, hello there. If today I don't piss at least one person off on my YouTube channel or my podcast, I will not be doing my job. And by the way, those of you on YouTube, there is a preamble on my audio-only podcast. It's about 59 seconds long, and it sort of explains, who I am and that I'm likely to piss people off. It's really worth listening to, but what I did is I put a trailer on my YouTube channel page. So if you go to the top, it's about 59 seconds long. You can listen to who I am, what I talk about, and the sacred cows that I tend to enjoy knocking over. I will anger some people. And as I said, today if I anger nobody, I have not done my job. So I want to talk about self-sealing systems that you see in cults. And what is a self-sealing system? It's like when you talk to somebody who has a very strong ideology, who has very cult-like thinking, they have this sort of circular logic. Like you can't get in. Nothing lands with them because they have this ideology in their head that whatever you say, it seems to either bounce off or they reinterpret what you're saying a certain way. So I call it self-sealing because whatever you say, especially if it contradicts what they believe or challenges what they believe, the system seals up more tightly. I was thinking about you know what? This is a good metaphor. It's a metaphor, not a visual metaphor, but the way it feels. When you're inside a system like this and you're sort of starting to have doubts and you see things are not quite working, but you're afraid to question, what it feels like to me is like a Chinese finger trap. You know those finger traps, like you put your fingers in it and it's like woven fabric, and if you pull, it gets tighter and tighter. So the more you try and pull away, the tighter it gets. That's what this sort of self-sealing system feels like when you're on the inside. It's like this Chinese finger trap. That's what it feels like viscerally. So it got me thinking about, there's a movie called The Village, which was made in 2004 or released in 2004, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. You say Shyamalan? Yes, I think it's Shyamalan. I think he hates it when people get his name wrong. And it's a great example of a self-sealing system. Now, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, so don't worry. But I think I might want to do an entire episode on this film. I wrote down sort of the plot. It's set in what seems to be a 19th century village surrounded by dangerous woods inhabited by monstrous creatures. The residents live by strict rules to avoid provoking, quote, those we don't speak of, close quotes. Over time, we learn this entire setup is an elaborate ruse created by the village elders to protect themselves and their children from the pain and corruption of the outside world. Now, that's not a complete spoiler alert, just so you know. But it's really worth watching that film because that film is an example of, the village is an example of a self-sealing system. They have villainized anybody on the outside. And everybody is so terrified that they just stay inside. They pull closer together. The self-sealing system doesn't just reject anybody who thinks differently or speaks differently. It prepares the devoted, the devout, for signs that will prove their ideology. Like they'll say certain things like, you'll hear this from an outsider. You'll hear this from an evil person. And so it's preparing them so that when they hear those words, they hear those ideas, they know, oh, this is one of the others. This is one of the evils. In NXIVM, it's so funny when I say NXIVM, we actually called it ESP, Executive Success Programs, but NXIVM is that the whole world knows it as. But in ESP, you were trained to listen to people's language, and you were listening for their out-of-causedness or their disintegrations. Like if you heard somebody speaking and you heard any blame in their language, you go, oh, they're disintegrated. And it's almost like you sort of wrote off who they were or the way they thought because you can clearly see they have problems. So just to go back for a second, at cause, which I think comes from NLP, is where you recognize you are the cause of all things in your life. And I've mentioned before why this is just a fucking horrible idea. When you blame anybody else, when you blame others, it means that you're not at cause in your life. So you're out of cause. and by Ranieri's terms, you're disintegrated. So we were trained constantly to listen for those things in language with other people. And it was interesting. I wrote a letter to the executive board in 2016. This would have been 10 months before I left, I think, maybe a year. And I wrote about all the problems I saw in the company. And I wrote about how everybody was lionizing Ranieri. Of course, I was doing it too, but they were sort of making him into a religious figure. And I was saying things, I think, like, I can see why, people think we're a cult. And it was incredible to reread that letter. But what was interesting is years later, when I reconnected with people that were on the inside and that had come out, they said to me that when Ranieri read the letter, he just said, yeah, well, he's out of cause. And because I was pointing out problems in the organization, the framing of the ideology was, well, that's blame. And blame means being out of cause. And that means you're not taking responsibility or ownership for your part in all things. All things. I mean, back in history, like, he was trying to explain to us, like, we were responsible for Nazi Germany. It was pretty fucked up. Hey, quick interlude. If you're liking these conversations and want to help me keep expressing what is on my mind, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and maybe even follow the podcast wherever you listen. And if you want to go a step further in supporting the show and getting access to some behind-the-scenes rants, you can join me over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Mark Vicente. It really does make a difference. All right, back to the episode. So you learn to see the signs of the others in the outside world, and you learn to reject it, and you learn to minimize them and who they are and how they think as less than you. In ESP, a lot of us felt very superior because we seemed to have this superior understanding of language and of the human psychodynamic. It was pretty fucking narcissistic, honestly. And it reminds me of extreme forms of religion. If you talk to somebody who's super religious, who's like, what some people call like a Bible thumping, Christian, for example, it doesn't have to be a Christian, it can be whoever. Let's say you're dealing with a person like that. If you criticize, let's say Jesus, if you criticize Jesus, they write you off. You're basically evil, It reminds me, I keep on posting this now and again. In the movie Highlander, I'm going to spoil Highlander if you've never seen it, but my God, it was made in the 80s. Come on, guys, watch it. The warrior, the Scottish warrior, gets run through with a sword and gets killed, but he comes back from the dead because he's actually an immortal. And the woman he was, I guess, his girlfriend sleeping with, basically riles the village up to try to kill him. Run him out. And there's a great line where she says something like, he's in league with Lucifer. And it's always struck me that level of like brainwashing and the excitement that she has about portraying him as evil. It's always blown my mind. But just to go back to Jesus for a second, if you're dealing with a person who's a zealot and you talk about something good that happened in your life, they might filter it through, well, you're not giving Jesus credit. You're not giving God credit for that thing because the only good things that happen come from Jesus. And so you begin to realize like you can't actually have a rational conversation with them because they're so fixated on Jesus is the cause and the creation of everything and everything in your life that like if you use keywords like you criticize Jesus or you don't thank Jesus, that's a problem. And so they become more convinced that they have the answer and you don't. And like, you might be evil or you might just be now more susceptible to evil because you haven't taken Jesus into your heart. And again, listen, I'm not criticizing people that feel this way. I'm just pointing out this is a pattern that people that are very, very ultra religious, extreme zealots have. And multiple religions do this. I mean, there's multiple names for God. And in some religions, if you criticize their God, they will kill you. They will cut your head off. So not just Christianity. Now, I'm seeing this play out in politics as well. This is the part where people start getting pissed off, by the way. People that are very devoted to their political religion, and I mean what I say, political religion, have been told what to listen for. You know, if you hear somebody say this thing or that thing, oh, that means they're a Nazi or a racist or a white supremacist or some kind of denier. There are so many deniers, you know, just take your pick. There's all kinds of deniers you could be. But that becomes a self-sealing system because, you know, if you watch your news channel, you know, your voice of your God, they tell you the talking points, they reinforce your talking points, and they criticize the other side's talking points. What they say is the other side's talking points. And you're told who the bad people are and what keywords they use. So you're prepared, mentally prepared, to seal yourself more closely to your tribe. And when you hear those keywords, it reinforces the sealing. Your cult's hypothesis is proven that you're right and good and the others are awful and evil, the others. And I know when I say your cult hypothesis is proven, I know some of you go, well, my political beliefs are not a cult. And this is the thing that I keep on going on about. It's really easy to analyze the others as being in a cult. The difficult thing, and the thing that takes enormous courage and humility, and honestly, you got a fucking backbone to do it, is to analyze your way of thinking and wonder, are there signs of extremism, of zealotry, of cult-like thinking? You're usually going to come up with the answer of, fuck, no, I'm a good person, and I'm rational, and I'm logical. And I have to tell you, from my position, when I look at the news and I look at some of the shit my friends post, I'm like, no, you're in a cult. Let me just give you an example of what I mean. I did the previous podcast to this. I talked about diversity of thought. Let me just play this for a second here. 1 second. And I've said this before, but you know, I find America right now so obsessed with diversity. So obsessed with, you know, diversity quotas. And so I find it very interesting that while there's this desire for diversity in appearance, there is no fucking desire for diversity in thought. I think one of the problems with this guest of mine is that she has too much diversity in thought, and the algorithm does not like that. So, I've said it before, if diversity is our strength, motherfuckers, it needs to be in thought as well. And I do not understand the impulse right now from the good people to suppress ideas that fall outside of the boundaries of their own agenda. You do understand that is religion. That is fucking culty. Stop fucking doing it. Wake the fuck up. Diversity is more than just skin color. It's a lot more than just that. Yeah, I was pretty strong in that statement. So that was an excerpt from the podcast. And the thing is, when I say I don't understand, I do understand. I do on a pattern level. I understand that they're in a self-sealing system. What I sometimes struggle with, even though I was obviously in the same position, is just like, can't you see? Can't you see? And of course, the answer is no, they can't see. So this diversity of thought thing, somebody on YouTube, who I'm sure will unsubscribe immediately and say awful things before they leave, maybe, we'll see, had an issue with it and said it's a right-wing talking point. And I heard somebody say something, there was a meme the other day, where somebody says, okay, well, Hitler drank water and I drink water, so am I Hitler? Like, that's the problem with watching the news, is the news starts to tell you what the other talking point is. So diversity of thought is a right-wing talking point. I think I noticed that before I heard any right-wing person say it. Like, it's logical. It's a logical thing to go, okay, so diversity is important here, 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 and here, but not here. Why not there? Why is it not good there? But the thing is, that's one of those keywords or key terms that raises people's hackles and says, oh, no, that's a right-wing talking point, and right-wing is Nazi, and it's white supremacist, and they have no empathy, and they're psychopathic, and they're whatever. Okay, therefore, because I use that, I am very, very evil. You see, it sounds kind of silly, right? Well, that's what a self-sealing system is like. Another example, I've been following with great interest. I'm gonna have to be very careful now because the algorithm gods restrict certain words, and there's a particular word for when a person, usually a man, forces themselves on, usually a woman but not always, and does carnal things to them without consent. There's a word starting with R. And this, by the way, bothers me enormously that using that word is somehow against community standards and guidelines, because what's happening is this terrible, terrible crime is being erased from language online because the algorithm says, well, you can't use that word. It's, against community standards and blah, blah, blah. And the fucking large language model can't discern the difference between when you're talking about criminal behavior and immoral behavior, reprehensible behavior, crimes against women, but you can't use the word. There are reports of grooming gangs and gangs of men that are young women in Europe. And there are reports that when parents speak out about the terrible things that have been done to their children, their daughters, sometimes underage, where these assaults by multiple men have been done on them, and they've destroyed these young women. You can see I'm really struggling with this conversation as well, because I want to use the word that the criminal word that it actually is. And what's really interesting is that the parents are vilified instead. The attackers, the abusers, are not vilified. In fact, they are sometimes let off, never imprisoned, or released from prison. And it is the parents that are vilified, accused of things, harassed by the government. And there are some activists that have even been prosecuted and imprisoned and are still in prison. And why, you say? Because when you hear this, most rational people, when you hear this, you are like, well, that's fucking terrible. It is. It's absolutely vile. Not only the act that is done to these young girls, but also when parents who it is natural to a mother, to a father, to a family member to be absolutely outraged about what has been done to a young girl, and they speak out, and then they are investigated for speaking out. Most people are like, that is horrible. But you see there's keywords in here that will make sense to some people. If the attacker or attackers were, and this is the case in Europe, were immigrants or asylum seekers, that changes everything. Because then what happens is, so the story is that, somebody says an immigrant, attacked, or an asylum seeker attacked. Then suddenly it reframes everything, because then you realize, oh, no, this person saying this thing, they're actually the evil one. Because they're racist. They're white supremacist racists. How dare you complain about the of your young child at the hands of somebody who happens to be a different color? That's evil. You should not do that. And so you have an entire legal system that's now on board with that. That's part of this very cult-like thinking that will protect the asylum seeker, protect the immigrants. And listen, just so you understand what my position is, I don't care what color you are, I don't care. Whether you're an asylum seeker, I don't care. Whether you're an immigrant, I've been an immigrant in multiple countries. I only care about your character and what you do to people. Like, are you a good person or a bad person? I think that that's R word. When you do that R word, you're a bad fucking person. I don't give a shit what color you are or what religion you are. I don't care. What you did is bad. You have hurt somebody, perhaps for the rest of their life. But you see, the people that are ideologically infected are prepared with the keywords that they know that if somebody complains about this kind of assault and they use the word immigrant, they are the problem. Do you see what I'm saying? And this is where people are like, some of you must be feeling all kinds of weird things right now. Because it sounds like, Mark, it sounds like you're a white supremacist. It sounds like you're racist. You're saying that this is logical, but I don't think it's logical. I think that you're not accepting of all people in all colors. Yeah, okay. Some of you guys need to go to South Africa. Some of you guys need to go to South Africa, land in South Africa. And one of the most beautiful things that you hear, the last time I landed in Johannesburg, Gauteng, was just hearing all the languages. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Some of y'all haven't heard a lot of languages, so shut up. So there are keywords that we are prepared with. You know, when we're in a cult, there are keywords we're prepared with. So I'm going to say a few keywords right now. And what I want you to ask yourself is, when you hear these keywords, it's worth asking yourself, why do you think they're bad? Who told you they were bad? And when did you begin to believe they were bad? Like, if you hear grooming gangs, the person that says grooming gangs, are they a bad person? Okay, maybe not. What about the person that says freedom? See, because freedom's this weird word now that's sort of like, well, no, that's populism. Populism, but for the people, by the people, very, very bad. Motherfucker, what are you aligning with the CIA and the governments and like, what? Anyway, natural immunity. When did that become a bad word? Who told you it was a bad word? What kinds of people use that word? Sovereignty, another big key word. When you hear the word sovereignty, that person's a problem. They're a gun-toting, yeehaw, Christian, gun-loving, NRA, lunatic, white supremacist. It's the white people that are the problem. It's the white people using words like sovereignty, which is funny because I've seen a lot of non-white people use the word too. In fact, it has been not the word, but the concept has been important to non-white people trying to get their freedom for a long time. Being a sovereign being in charge of your own life and destiny has been the rallying cry of so many oppressed people. But now it's interesting because now that word's getting reframed. And understand, I've said this before, and I know people are like, no, it's not true. The news organizations are fed things by the intelligence agencies, and the intelligence agencies have working for them psychologists, psychiatrists, people in the field of psy-ops who help show them what to say and how to say it so that you can shift culture. Because apparently these people, these messianic people, believe that they know a better way. So just remember that, it's a whole language restructuring. Exactly what happened in ESP NXIVM. Raniere worked on changing language, and that's what happens in all cults. You change language, you change meanings, and pretty soon you've changed the person's thinking and their outlook. Oh, there's one more word I was thinking, patriotic. Patriotic has become a terrible word in America, maybe even in Europe. Patriot, patriotism, horrible word. It's as bad as colonialism. To be a patriot, God, no, you shouldn't be a patriot. You need to pull that shit down. You need to destroy everything. So I think this is probably the point where I've already pissed a bunch of people off. I'm sure my YouTube comments are going to be filled with ire, or people that are just like, I can't even listen to him anymore. I mean, he's just, he's lost the plot. Right. I've lost the plot. Yeah. It's funny. Some people say like, well, why should I listen to you? Because you've been in several cults. Yeah, I have. And I've seen the pattern. Man, I have seen the pattern. I've lived the pattern from the inside and on the outside. The sad part about having these keywords that keep you in a self-sealing system is you become trained to reject everything that the others say, even if what they're saying is true, essential for your own survival. You have to reject it. I mean, it gets me thinking about, some of you that follow the NXIVM story are aware of the DOS women who are still loyal to DOS. And I think they still have a YouTube channel. I think sometimes back in the day, they would shit talk me a lot. I don't have a desire to shit talk them, but what I just want to talk about the sort of pattern I see. They're still loyal, and they believe that Raniere did no wrong. Maybe he was careless, but he did no wrong. The fault lies with the whistleblowers and the FBI. They're the problem. And they don't use words like evil, but it's kind of tantamount to the same thing. We're the problem. Us and the FBI are actually the cause of the problems. Not what Raniere did. Not that he hurt people, because in their framing maybe still is the idea that, well, the abuse doesn't exist, or you can't actually hurt people because everybody's at cause. They just don't realize it. So they're still devoted to their cause. And that's the problem with a self-sealing system is, and I care about, some of these women a lot, all of them obviously, but there's some in particular I really care about. And there's nothing I can do because they are in a self-sealing system. And so that's something that just makes me feel sad. And so I just want to go back to one more time, just before we close. The idea that it's everything I'm saying, if you apply it to the others, it's really, really easy. It's effortless, in fact. You can go, yep, that person in my life says this. That person in my life says that. I see people posting this. They are bad. They are bad because, and it's really easy to do that. Courage having courage might give you the ability to analyze your own tribe, your own bubble, your self-sealing system. And you might say, I am not in a self-sealing system. I am a free thinker. I'm willing to think about anything, talk to anybody. Okay, why over the holidays was this great push to not talk to family members and friends if they didn't believe what we believed? You understand that's shunning. But shunning has become good. If I say it separately, if I say, well, shunning is bad, you go, yeah. Okay. But cutting off friends and family members because they don't believe what you believe, that's shunning. You could always ask them, like, well, why do you believe what you believe? Explain it to me. But no, literally the news, people on the news have been telling you to shun people. That's a real problem, by the way. And that doesn't end well. I mean, just think about it. If the whole of the United States bifurcates completely and there's a wall between two factions and nobody talks to each other, how do you think that's going to end? It's not happily ever after, because you're going to have to silence the other part of the country. How are you going to silence them? Are you going to use violence? Are you going to shun them completely? Okay, well, you can do that. It doesn't end well. It's a very, very childlike thinking. It's like having a tantrum. I remember when I was a kid, I had a tantrum about my mother and father, and I had my little knapsack and took my knife and a few cans of food, and I walked out into the bush, and I said, I'm never coming back. I'm never talking to you again. 7 hours later, I came back because I realized I couldn't, that it was dangerous. There were the fucking wild animals out at night. It's childish. Shunning is childish. I know. We did it in ESP. I participated in it. It's fucking stupid. And you know what? In the end, it's evil. So just to go back to the courage thing, the last thing I want to just talk about is like when you start to wake up, when you realize you've been in a self-sealing system, the hardest thing, and the thing that does take courage, is to just admit that you were wrong. It takes enormous courage, enormous backbone to say, you know what, I messed up. I messed up. I got caught up in this belief system and I made you bad. You know, and when I came out, I called people that I had vilified and spoke to them. And you know what's amazing though is they were good to me. You know, they said, I get it. I get it. I really understand. I see people still doubling down on some really crazy shit. I see news anchors on television. There's so much evidence has come out about stuff recently, and I see news anchors doubling down. And you could say, yeah, but it's because, you know, they have like $30 million contracts and $40 million contracts and $50 million contracts, and like they want to keep their way of living. Okay. That's horrible. That's horrible. You speak to millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, and you're going to double down on shit that's just wrong and bad for people? You're going to destroy civilization because you need the paycheck? I don't know. Doesn't sound very heroic to me. So, you know, the one thing is recognizing that maybe our tribe has some issues. That's good. It's great to recognize, man, I got caught up in this shit. I don't think it's good to keep doubling down. I just don't. Now, I understand again, and this is the problem with doubling down. Not the problem with doubling down. The problem with the self-sealing system is you do double down. So no matter what evidence you hear from the outside world, outside your bubble, you reject it because you've been trained to reject it. There is so much information that has come out in the last few decades about shit that the government has done, the intelligence agencies have done, politicians have done, movie stars have done, rock stars have done. It's staggering. Staggering. But isn't it interesting what mainstream media chooses to report on and doesn't choose to report on? And this is the problem when you stick with cult literature and what the cult says. You don't know what's going on in the outside world. And then what they do is, because the cult leader always knows what the outside world is saying, by the way. So what they do is they prepare you. In the case of NXIVM, you know, Raniere would say, you know, if they say we are bad, they're suppressive. So, you know, Frank Parlato has this blog. He writes a bunch of stuff that turns out to be true. We all thought he was suppressive. Then when I got out and I spoke to him, I was like, holy shit, I got this backwards and upside down and wrong. He was actually telling the truth about stuff. But I was trained because Raniere was saying, don't read what Parlato writes because that's being dishonorable. And that's fortifying hate. The equivalent of hate speech. That's hate speech. Don't listen to him. He was listening, and he was figuring out what does he need to do in the educational model to get us to reject it. And what he came up with eventually was anything that goes against what we're saying is the equivalent of hate speech, and they are suppressives, and they have taken the fall. That's how a self-sealing system works. As always, my friends, stay curious.